There's a general progression of how artists have engaged with technology from very early on in the Australia Council history, and we have continued supporting this kind of practice through special initiatives or through the general grant rounds that the Australia Council runs. And we're always keen to help artists develop their practice in this area more and to support the sustainability of the industry in that space. From all reports that we get, Australian artists are seen by other artists around the world as leading the field in this particular area. And the Australian artists have created this work from nothing really. They always make do with very little, but they kind of achieve extraordinary outcomes. More recently with the broadband initiative, where we funded artists to work extensively with new generation or next generation broadband technology to find ways of using the physics of that network to create new arts practices. And so this has really been driven by the artists themselves, artists approaching us saying, we want to play in this space, we want to work in this space, can you find a way of supporting us in creating our work for this technology-based environment. And so the Australia Council was very responsive in listening to artists and saying, here are some opportunities to develop that. So the world is actually watching, I think, Australians engaging in this space, because the next generation broadband is going to be a very important space, not just for the arts but for culture in general, and for many other industries. And I just think Australian artists have always jumped on board and had a go and created some extraordinary stuff in this space. There's a great entrepreneurial spirit and get up. Well, look, it's a really interesting exercise to do, I think, for both organisations and artists. There are precedents to this. We at the Australia Council have an initiative called Synapse, which is an art science organisation, and the Synapse residencies in particular are managed by the Australian Network for Art and Technology that I mentioned previously. What the Australian Network for Art and Technology does is manage the relationship between the artist and the science organisation that the artist goes into, so that the artist becomes a co-researcher in a sense. So they become part of the business of that particular science organisation. They're not there to paint the CEO or to create their work in a corner. It's about integrating their practice into the practice of that particular science organisation. So what happens when the duality of that role is respected, when the artist is seen as important or as an equal to the scientist, is that new kind of ideas emerge that nobody would have thought of before in that space of experimentation, and sometimes failure, because failure is as important in those environments sometimes as success, because you can only learn by kind of making mistakes and moving on from them. So I think the trick with these kind of placements are to ensure that the artists and the organisation that they go into understand the relationship between each other, know that the artist is there as an equal and integrated into the business of that particular organisation, and that the artist is given the freedom to experiment and do things that organisation may not have thought of or built into their business plan in the beginning of the process, but through that serendipity sometimes extraordinary and amazing things occur. So I think artists often go into a space and stir it up a bit, which is not a bad thing, and that to me is an element of surprise, and that element of new form and new engagement often allow people to think differently about their businesses and the way that they engage in a sustainable way. And interdisciplinarity, I think, is incredibly important in this complex world that we exist in, because we all have to find ways of engaging with each other if we're going to solve some of the problems that we face on this planet. We can't be working in insular ways, and so developing languages and mechanisms and strategies to work in cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary ways is going to be essential for us to continue on working in the way that we do as human beings, I think. Look, from all the other projects that we've managed where artists have been placed in unusual situations or in new types of organisations, the artists have always come back to us saying that they've learned an enormous amount, not only about their own practice but about the way that other aspects of society function, which helps them think differently about their practice as well. So I think in this space, artists will develop an understanding of their own work and what it means to themselves and to people around them, and also how they can engage in these organisations, maybe to assist those organisations to think differently about what it is that they do. So there's usually an incredibly beneficial mutual learning that takes place in these spaces when people are open and accessible and willing to put their preconceptions aside of what it is that they are going to be doing in that space, or preconceptions about the organisations about what it is that the artists will be doing. So that space of that unknown space, that space of unpredictable experimental exploration, I think is a space that has to be cherished and supported. And so the artists, I think, have always come back to us saying that those opportunities just to play and to use technology or work with people who have skills very differently to the skills that they have benefited them enormously in developing their own sustainable arts careers later on.